Okay, everyone, good morning. It's Wednesday morning, and this is the morning briefing from the Celtic Way. I'm back. It's Hamish. Hello, in case you've forgotten me. John, hello, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good, Hamish. Preseason rumbling on. Plenty to talk about. I'm already. I'm thankful that the weeks of nothing to talk about are now behind us, and we can actually talk about things that are actually happening.
Yeah, it's been good actually. Recently, there's been a lot happening virtually every day, and today is no different. We've got
Mm-hmm.
last night's match to talk about, and certainly a few things we can read into there, a few performances, good and bad. And yeah, some comments from Brendan Rodgers after the game as well. A few kind of transfer related things, a couple of players
Mm-hmm.
leaving the club, and whatever else is happening, John. So it's been a good time. What did you make of the game last night?
Standard preseason fare. Like I think when a manager's obviously switching 11 at half time, it just takes all the any kind of interest out of the game to an extent. Um, I think the first half was fine. I think Celtic were fairly fluid, and there was a little bit of rustiness here and there.
Yeah,
That mix of youth and experience. I think the youths were more impressive against Queen's Park than they were against Cork City. I think they just let it got a little bit ragged in the second half when all the youths came on. They kind of lost their way a bit, which is probably to be expected when you're making so many changes. And Stephen Welsh is the most senior player in the team, but they eventually got their win and goal, which I think is a good thing. It shows that they're hungry and that they're pushing, and I think Rodgers likes all that kind of thing. I'm interested now to see actually just coming out of the game, like the young players that make the trip to Portugal. I don't know if they'll all be going or some of them will be going back to Glasgow. I know the squad is going directly from Ireland to Portugal, so I'm actually quite interested to see which youngsters are included on the trip because those will be the ones that have impressed Rodgers over the last week or so. But in
I think they're
terms of the
live
game,
streaming that on Celtic TV. It's like X Factor, isn't it? Are you making it to
yeah, they
Camp
should do
or
that.
whatever?
They should bring in Henrik Larsson to break some poor young guy's heart. No, but in all seriousness, it's a preseason game. It's one of those ones where I'm not even reading too much into it. I know we're going to talk about Inamura, but even Inamura, like I'm not reading too much into that situation. I know he was impressive to an extent, but I think there's factors around that too. So we'll talk about all that later on.
Could we maybe? Because I think that's probably the two games we've seen is the only times I think we're going to see that kind of team that played the second half last night, and even
Yeah.
more so against Queens Park. I
Mm-hmm.
think from now on, you might see a few youngsters here and there, but I
Mm-hmm.
think we're going to see the familiar Celtic squad that we know. Might be a good point just to pick out a few youngsters who have
Yeah.
maybe impressed us over the past couple of games. Who would, if I said to you to name a couple, who would be on your list?
I think on Friday it was Thomas Hatton. I thought he did well in
Yeah,
the second half against Queen's Park, so I would probably pick up him. I think last night, and not just for his goal, but I thought Colby Donovan looked decent on that right flank as well, at that right back, and looked like he was getting stuck in, and like looked like he was capable. Other than that, nobody's really stood out and impressed me too much, Hamish. I don't know how you feel about it. I'm not noticing like a standout youngster coming out from the group. It's more, I've been more pleased with, like, especially on Friday, that the collective, they maintained the intensity of the first half against Queen's Park, which I thought was good. Ben Summers has been doing all right as well. I thought he was all right yesterday, and so I'm quite happy with how the unit was functioning rather than standout players from that unit.
yeah. I mean, it's a comment I've seen a few people saying they were. It seems quite harsh because you judge the first team not during pre-season but later on. It seems harsh to judge the
Mm.
B team, but I have seen a few people saying they were expecting a little bit more and maybe to have
Mm.
a few more players to feel really excited about, like Sean McCardle, who was so hyped at the end of
Yeah.
the season. Like his expectation is just up here. Everyone's watching him last night, wanting him to dazzle like Messi, and he was fine, but he's a 16 or 17-year-old.
Yeah.
I agree. Thomas Hatton, I actually thought last night Thomas Hatton really
Mm.
came on to a game later on. Like he's, and I remember, I think last year, I think he played one of them, maybe the Ayr United friendly, because I remember asking someone, who's that guy?
Mm.
He's quite skillful, quite quick,
Mm-hmm.
quite strong runner. Um, yeah, so maybe we see more of him. Kyle Ure is one I'd pick out as well. Kind
Mm.
of deeper midfielder, great left foot, had a couple of really good passes last night. 19 years old, but if you look at a photo of him, he looks older in terms of his body and even his face. He doesn't look like a teenager.
Yeah, he's developed physically. I know what you mean by that. It definitely looks more kind of ready for the rough and tumble, if you will, of senior football. But yeah, no, it's good for the youngsters, and as I say, I think it'll be telling who goes on the Portugal trip. A couple of people saying Dane Murray, but you see, Dane Murray now, I'm considering him like a first team fringe player rather than like an emerging youth player, just because not only has he been around for so long, I know he doesn't have a lot of experience, but just the way Rodgers is treating him, I think the fact that he got starts over Welsh in both the games, I think says that Dane Murray's like that. He's like that fourth choice centre back at the moment.
Yeah.
Which means that he should be regarded and judged in first team terms. And I don't think Dane Murray's done badly at all. I think he's actually pretty accomplished, very comfortable in possession, and is getting through these minutes as he comes back from another injury. The big thing with him, as we've noted, is just the fitness aspect of it.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on these guys. As you say, I think a few of them will go away. I remember a couple of years ago, Brendan Rodgers took a few away to Japan, like Daniel Kelly. I remember first finding out about him at that stage. So maybe the ones who have impressed him the most, not in terms of just the matches, but more so training, will go away.
And I know a few people were wondering where Jude Bonner was last night. He's actually moving on loan to Ayr United in the Championship, and I think that's going through. So I think that's why he didn't feature last night. So Jude Bonner will get his chance at senior football at Ayr United, which I think is a good place for young players to go right now. Just Ayr United will be competitive in that division. I think playing for a team at the top end of the Scottish Championship is decent for a young Celtic player, and hopefully he does well there, impresses working with Scott Brown. So good luck to Jude Bonner.
Yeah, so a loan move for him. What about a loan move for Hayato Inamura? Because that seemed to be the feeling ahead of last night. Brendan Rodgers says Inamura surprised him. He says he surprised me. And he talks about him being so smooth with the ball and always looking to play forward, which I must admit is something I really noticed last night from Inamura. Say what you want about the opposition. It was a pre-season match. He only played 45 minutes. But in terms of when he had the ball, he doesn't take the safe option. He doesn't knock the ball back into the centre-back if he can avoid it. He is always looking to play forward. And, I mean, last night he looked pretty good, I thought. So, interesting. I mean, there's been questions already, John, should Brendan Rodgers be getting surprised about a new signing?
Yeah. So, listen, I had those comments out there this morning, and there's a lot of chatter around my tweet on it. Just not for anything I've said, but just what Brendan Rodgers said about it. And so I'm seeing a lot of reaction to what Brendan Rodgers said, and a lot of people outraged that Brendan Rodgers would be surprised by Inamura and what he's offered in the first few days of training and in the match. I don't think that there has to be a drama around that. I think it's just, I think we've discussed this before, but in my head, and I'm increasingly feeling like this is reality, not just my theory, Celtic have two transfer strategies on the go. One of them is like a club development thing, and one of them is players who Rodgers thinks can improve the first team. Rodgers isn't going to have full input on one half of that because there's lots of scouting process. It's a long time in football since managers have scouted players anyway. That doesn't really happen that often anymore. So these development type players, Brendan Rodgers won't know as much about them as perhaps you might expect, given he's the manager of Celtic. But I don't necessarily think that's a red flag. I think that's just a nature of the way that Celtic are doing business for the likes of Inamura. So who is signing Inamura? Well, I think it's a collective effort. I don't think there's one person going, we have to sign this guy, we're going to sign this guy under Brendan Rodgers' feet. That's not how it works. He's been identified, it's been discussed, it's a low risk, cheap, six-figure fee for the player, and he's come in as a bit of a punt. And actually think it's refreshing that Brendan Rodgers has been honest about that and not tried to sell him as something that he's not, because I think that puts unrealistic expectations on the player, and it sets weird expectations from the support. Everyone knows that he's like this development project player, which is fine in balance. And I think I don't think people should be too worried about what Brendan Rodgers said after the game. If anything, it's a good sign that Inamura has come in and is apparently up to the standard of Celtic training, first of all. We've seen players come in and not be before. So he's come in, he's fully fit because he's been playing mid-season in Japan. And then he did impress to an extent last night, Hamish. Now, again, you noted there's a couple of caveats. He wasn't tested at all defensively, so that's a big part of it. And Cork City gave him the keys to the city. I think he must have been at that civic ceremony the day before, because he had the key to Cork. He had so much space on that left-hand side and wasn't challenged at all, which, to be fair to him, he did exploit, I think, successfully. I think he was probably Celtic's best player in that first half, which is a good sign for someone so early. So I was impressed with him. A long way to go. I still wouldn't be surprised if he heads out on loan, etc. But people get so stressed out about this thing where Brendan Rodgers isn't signing off and personally delivering every single player that arrives at Celtic. I get that if it's like there's 8 of them that arrive in one transfer window and Brendan Rodgers doesn't have a first team striker, that would be a problem. But there's a long way to go in the window and people just need to chill out a bit. That's my wee rant for the Wednesday morning over Hamish.
But it's an interesting point, because I'm seeing a lot of frustration already. You know, I mean, I posted a squad depth chart yesterday, and virtually every quote, every reply was, you know, the squad's an absolute mess. And I don't agree that the squad is a mess. I think it's a strong squad that's lost a few key players. Jota obviously injured, lost Kyogo, lost Kuhn, not replaced any of them. And I think if the squad looked like it does at the moment at the end of the window, then we'd all feel, you know, a bit stressed about the season. But I think Celtic have done good work so far. You know, I feel like people are talking things down, and I think Benjamin Nigren will prove to be a really good signing. Like, Celtic getting that done before the start of pre-season is what we call out for. Maybe it's the fact it was a low transfer fee. Maybe if we paid 6 or 7 million for Nigren, which we probably would have had to if we didn't have that contract situation, maybe everyone would be looking at it differently. Maybe that's part of it. People want Celtic to spend money. I think Celtic will spend money. You know, Nigren, I think, will improve the first team. I think he's coming into play. Tierney is clearly going to improve the first team. And okay, Inamura, Osmond, potentially ones for the future. But I don't mind that, as long as we're not doing that instead of improving right now. And there's no indication from Brendan Rodgers at all that that's what's happening. It just seems like you know, the club are pushing to improve the first team, and it seems like we're going to throw a few speculative punts in. That's what I would call it. You know, an educated punt. Someone like Inamura might work, might not work. Osmond might work, might not work. Maybe we'll see, you know, Yamada coming in. I know he's a little bit older, but might be the same kind of idea. And I don't mind it, to be honest, as long as the first team is looking good. I'm fine with that, but the club need to get on with it. But yeah, people get quite worked up. I get everyone's different, and it's all just because we care about Celtic. But we are only in the 9th of July. Like, we do have time, and we have done a lot of business so far.
Yeah. And again, people saying in the chat, just responding to what I was saying, like, Inamura shouldn't go out on loan. Inamura is clearly not just a young prospect. Like, you can't do this boom-bust thing, because what if he has a bad game against Sporting Lisbon? Does that mean he's rubbish and that we shouldn't be giving him any minutes at all? That's not how it works. Inamura's journey at Celtic is going to take place over the summer. He'll be assessed over the summer, and if any decision is made on whether he's part of the squad or goes out on loan, it'll be made at the end of the summer. So a half against Cork City is a really good first impression, and I was pleased that he made it, because it's easy to mess that up and look out of place, out of position, out like a fish out of water, and he didn't do that. So that's a good sign. But everyone, I think it's just a lot of things, positive or negative right now, everyone's just latches on to the most extreme version of positive or negative. There's no room for in the middle, and I know it's boring, but I'm very much someone who likes to live in the middle of a situation. And I'm just looking at Inamura, and even if Rodgers hasn't, you know, nobody's saying that Brendan Rodgers has no idea that he was coming into Celtic and he's just arrived at training and they've gone, right, he's in your squad now. Obviously, if Brendan Rodgers has been part of that process along the way, it's just obviously he wasn't signed with, Rodgers didn't sign it, or Celtic didn't sign him with the intent of going straight into Brendan Rodgers' plans, because Brendan Rodgers has made it clear that he wasn't going to be that. Those signings are still to come. Nigren is part of that. Tierney is part of that. I mean, Rodgers is saying he's very excited about Benjamin Nigren. He said that after the game last night. So those are signings that Brendan Rodgers thinks can make an immediate impact. And what everyone's waiting for is more of that. And hopefully what Rodgers said after the game, he said there's a lot of work going on in the background. and there are things that we're hoping to achieve over the coming weeks, we definitely need it, especially at the top end of the pitch. That's what fans are waiting on now, and it seems to be what Brendan Rodgers is waiting on. He's wanting attacking players in the team that can make a real difference. With the exit of Kuhn, with the exit of Kyogo in January, those are things that need to be addressed, and hopefully that is what Celtic deliver now before the start of the season.
Yeah, I mean that's what we need to see. The squad at the moment, as I say, has lost a few key players who haven't been replaced, but hopefully the club are working on that. I think they've done good business so far. And as I keep saying, it's still relatively early on. We've got a number of weeks until our first competitive match. I know. I guess maybe the Champions League factor as well has everyone just with a little bit more stress than normal, with obvious reasons, because we've got that huge qualifier. And listen, the proof will be in the pudding. What's the squad look like for that qualifier? Do we get through that qualifier? If we don't, obviously there'll be questions to answer. But I mean, transfers can be done quite quickly, and I think Celtic are working on stuff at the moment. Seems like there's a few kind of things going on. Just on Inamura, final point, he played at left back last night. And as is the case, everyone sees that and kind of goes, okay, right, he could play back up to Kieran Tierney. My hunch is still that he's a centre back, and I think it was maybe more of a kind of pre-season fitting everyone in type thing. And I think as we go on in pre-season, we will start to see him playing at centre back. I could be wrong. Celtic might have signed him to be a left back. I thought he was really good at left back last night, but I feel like all the things he did last night at left back are transferable to left centre back. That coming out with the ball, finding those nice passes. But I still feel he's going to be a centre back for us.
I do too. I think he looked athletic enough to be in the position. He didn't look like a centre half out of position, I would say, which is good. But I did also notice that he was tiring towards the end of the half, because there's a lot more physical effort that goes into being a full back than a centre back. And he was getting up and down the pitch, so that's something that I think would need to be addressed if he was going to be a consistent left back option, I think. But yeah, I agree with you. What was good about it, he did have that attacking intent of a full back too. He wasn't just passing it backwards and doing the safe options, and that was positive. And that also indicates to me that, again, he didn't look like a player out of position, that he's somewhat comfortable with the role. But I agree with you. I think over time, I think a centre back option will be the best one for him, because that's just where he's been playing for dozens of matches and throughout his university career. I think Rodgers also said that he's still developing physically as well after the game, so that indicates to me that he's wanting just him to be more physically robust in that role, because as we know in Scotland, it's so easy to get caught under the ball or out-muscled by a journeyman attacker from one of the bottom six teams, so that's something that you would need to cope with and deal with over time too.
Yeah, okay. So that's Hayato Inamura. Hopefully see more of him at the weekend. Someone we won't be seeing at the weekend, I don't think, is Stephen Welsh. Unfortunate night for Stephen Welsh in terms of being involved in the Cork equaliser. Bit of a mix-up with Ross Doohan. Actually, the second mix-up they'd had, because they had one earlier that ended up in the more serious thing on the night, which was his injury. Shoulder injury again, popped out I think for the fourth time, Brendan Rodgers was saying. So Brendan Rodgers reckons Stephen Welsh might need to think about having surgery. And I mean, Stephen Welsh, who was likely to be heading away, I'd say that would be unlikely now.
Yeah, I felt sorry for him when he was coming off the pitch, because I think from a Celtic's perspective, this doesn't really matter. This is more of a individual thing for Welsh now, because I think it's become apparent that Welsh doesn't have a future at Celtic. I think that's fair to say. He spent time on loan last season. I would be very surprised if he wasn't being lined up for a move before a shoulder injury. And now whether he wants to do one of those operations that helps address that, or whether a team will accept that his shoulder has issues, it's upsetting for him. And he did look upset coming off the pitch. And as I said, I just felt sorry for him most of all. And there was the mix-up of the goal. That wasn't a good situation between Doohan and Welsh. Just further underlined that, if Welsh was going to have a future at Celtic, he needed to have an absolute blow-away pre-season, and so coming into the team and immediately being involved in a bit of a calamity was just not the way that needed to go. And then it just further compounded by that shoulder. As Rodgers noted, it's the fourth time it's popped out. It's similar to Kyogo in a way. I know a lot of athletes have this these days, I think, just with the nature of their body's changing and stuff, they can just develop these joint issues from time to time. Yeah, ultimately though, the main thing that I'm taking away that is I just feel sorry for him, because he could have got a better move than he might now get, and I think he is capable of playing regularly somewhere at a decent level, and now that just feels like that's a little bit in jeopardy in the short term, so it's a shame for him.
Yeah, I mean, he's a Celtic fan, Stephen Welsh.
Yeah.
He's just a kind of lovely guy who loves the club. Sometimes feel like goes under the radar a bit for some reason when we talk about guys like Kieran Tierney and other guys being, Celtic Luke McCowan. Stephen Welsh is that as well. And it's probably not going to work out for him at Celtic, but a bit of a gutter, I think. And he looked pretty devastated, to be honest.
Yeah,
I know that's a strong word, but he did that when he came off. So that's a shame. Someone talking about Johnny Kenny, Ian talking, saying not sure he's going to cut it. So I saw a line last night, I think, that Johnny Kenny's probably going to sign a new contract this week. Did you see that?
I saw that Brendan Rodgers was saying that he wanted Johnny Kenny to. I don't think I've seen that update. I think Celtic want Johnny Kenny to commit to a long term at Celtic and then put him on a development path of some sort, which would involve going out on loan. It's my understanding that at least a couple of Scottish Premiership teams want Johnny Kenny on loan. And that if a loan was to happen, it might be in the Scottish Premiership, which I think would be a good thing for him and for Celtic if he signs a new contract. Because we've seen before, I think players can achieve consistent goal scoring in the Scottish Premiership without being too far along their development path or absolute standout players, and then that might unlock something for him at Celtic or beyond. There's an element. I think Brendan Rodgers likes Johnny Kenny, and I think that he just doesn't quite rate him at the moment, and I think that's a fair assessment. I have said before, but I like the kind of underdog thing with Johnny Kenny, and that is part of it too. You can kind of root for him. I agree with that comment that came up, though. I've not been particularly impressed by Johnny Kenny in any of his appearances for Celtic, really, to be frank, if we're being brutal about it. And so he does need time to go and impress somewhere else, because I don't think he's going to be able to come in and impress at the level that Celtic need him to. And that will come with regular games. He did it with Shamrock Rovers. He took a while to warm up at Shamrock Rovers and then eventually did. So if you could do that as a Scottish Premiership club, I think that would bode well for him. And then Celtic can kind of assess it from there. So we'll see what this new contract thing goes. I guess he'll have his own idea of what his development is. So, but I agree with the viewer there. Like, there's nothing to suggest that Johnny Kenny is going to be able to play a part at Celtic over the next season.
Like, it feels to me like Callum Osmond, who was all right last night, movement really good, finishing not great. Feels to me like he's probably going to be an obvious upgrade on Johnny Kenny and kind of in that third striker role that Kenny was probably half thinking he might have this season at Celtic and get some game time like he did at the end of last season. But just feels maybe like that striker department's just gone up a level with Osmond coming in and Kenny's kind of, well, I know he's third, isn't he? Because we've not actually signed a number one striker, but assuming we do, he would then be fourth. There's not enough room for that. So yeah, you're kind of crying out for him to really do amazing and do something really well. And he's had good moments, but just not kind of quite seeing it yet. But as I say, it might just be a case. I like the idea of getting him out on loan to a Scottish Premiership team. I just feel like that's like right in front of us. And I just feel like if he goes down to Bolton, who I think have been linked with him, okay, he could do really well there. But I just feel like Scottish football is where you're going to be hearing about him. And, you get a bit of hype going, and then maybe he's talked up in the media and suddenly, Brendan Rodgers looking at him, brings him back next season, and maybe he could be a player for us. But my feeling is that he's potentially not got it at the moment and might not be at the level even going forward. But signing a new deal is the chat, and then he'll probably head out on loan. The other thing was update on Cameron Carter-Vickers from the manager last night. So just basically confirming that Carter-Vickers has been training on his own after having that surgery at the start of the summer. Talk is that he will be about either just before or after the Newcastle game, which is only 10 days away. So no Carter-Vickers in terms of playing in Portugal, but he might be training at that stage.
Yeah, and that's a good sign. As I've noted, I'm very interested in CarterVickers' situation this summer. I'm not trying to sell Celtic players, but just because Rodgers has said like 3 or 4 times about these players who have been at Celtic for a long time and you need to refresh the squad, there's actually only 3 or 4 players that you would really put into that box that Brendan Rodgers talked about, and CarterVickers is one of them. So, interesting situation. I think I would love him to stay at Celtic. I feel like it's one of those ones where I feel like if CarterVickers stays this summer, he'll be at Celtic for ages. It's one of those ones. It feels like a little bit of a crossroads in that respect. Just at the stage he's at in his career and his value, etc. I could just, if he stays this summer, I just feel like he's going to be at Celtic for a long, long time, which would be great for us, I think, even taking into account his fitness and injury issues. He's so dominant and he's so calm and he's so composed for us, and it's actually really hard to get his profile in, playing regularly and committing to Celtic for a long time. So I'd be delighted when he's back. Yeah, I think he's become so part of the furniture at Celtic that sometimes he's now overlooked. His importance is now overlooked. It's a little bit that Callum McGregor thing, where he's been here for such a long time that nobody celebrates him too much on a regular basis. He just quietly goes about his business. And yeah, the sooner he's back, the better, because he is going to be needed for those Champions League games. That's a given. Everything regarding CarterVickers has to be how primed he is for that first leg of that qualifying tie.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know he fits the criteria of what Brendan Rodgers was talking about. I'd be surprised if CarterVickers is someone who was on Rodgers' mind when he made that statement. CarterVickers doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that you would say has maybe been at Celtic too long. I know maybe last season he wasn't quite at the level. He was still our best defender last season by a country mile. I think you'd probably look at guys like Rio Hatate. Greg Taylor, who Brendan Rodgers clearly wanted to keep, would maybe fit into that as well. But yeah, I think CarterVickers will be with us, and hopefully we can get him back playing as soon as possible. Hopefully we can find a good partner for him, because I guess when you look at how we've tended to fail finding a partner for him, it would fill you with fear if he was to leave, and obviously he's going to leave at some stage.
The reason I bring it up, and I think the reason why it's on my mind is because when I think of the players that could leave Celtic this summer, him leaving looks the hardest to replace, because having that kind of stability, defensive stability, is really difficult to recruit and just bed in immediately, and it takes time. Like, even when CarterVickers first arrived at Celtic, he took a wee bit of time to warm up, and Celtic's defence didn't really, it didn't really coalesce for a few months really under Ange, and I don't want us to have to go through that process again of bedding in a new defence. That just, there's something about that just gives me the fear. So I always, when we get a good defensive player or a good goalkeeper in who's doing the job quietly and effectively, it takes a lot for me to think that we have to change that. So I'm just hoping that stability is there in the defence next year with the addition of Tierney, Alistair Johnston, Cameron Carter-Vickers, another, and Tierney and Schmeichel or Sinisala. I think that's a really good back five. It's a really good starting back five. So I agree when you think of the squad and there's issues around depth maybe, but when everyone's saying the team is a mess, etc., I'm just like, well, that back five is actually, that sounds really good, and that's a really effective back five, not just domestically, but one I think that can compete in Europe. So
that's a Champions League level defence. If you're talking Schmeichel, Johnson was player of the tournament at Copa America last summer. Kieran Tierney, we all know about. CarterVickers. Just find a nice wee partner for CarterVickers and we'll be laughing. Okay, team, as you mentioned there, the team are flying straight from Cork to Lisbon, so they're not going back to Scotland. Saturday, 11 a.m. UK time, we play Estrela da Amadora at the Benfica campus. So, Paulo Bernardo and potentially Jota, maybe. I don't know. Going back, I don't know. Do you think Jota will fly with them? That'd be interesting. Well,
I think Jota's in Portugal at the moment, isn't he?
Okay.
So I think he went back to Portugal to his rehabilitation. So maybe he'll meet up with the squad and we'll get a bit of Jota media on his progress recovering from injury. Celtic like to leave these players alone sometimes, though, when they do have that injury and just get them totally out of the spotlight and get
When
people
are we
forgetting about them.
expecting Jota back? I know there's not been an update. Are we thinking like kind of he'll be out for the rest of the calendar year, or could he be back in November, something like that?
So, from what Rodgers said initially, I took it to mean he would be back in training towards the end of November. When it first happened, Rodgers gave a pretty in-depth update on it and just the timeline on it. And I took it that he would be back towards the end of November. But then you have to consider, when you've been out for such a long time, he's going to need a few weeks in training to even start coming back. He's not going to be even thrown in as a substitute. And that made me think we're not going to see him in a competitive game until January, maybe. So I've just, in my head, I've just ruled Jota out for the rest of the year. And maybe that's a bit harsh. But I guess only Celtic will know, only Jota will know how his progress is coming. Some of these players do recover quicker than others, and Jota seems like the kind of guy who'd be quite dedicated in getting himself back and making sure he's going through all the rehab and potentially doing a bit extra to get back. So it's all about building strength back in the leg and the knee with that kind of thing, and that takes a lot of it's not just Jota's going to be sitting on a treatment table there's a lot of work that Jota will have to do to get his knee back into playing condition. It's actually quite intensive what the players have to do to get back. So good luck to him, and hopefully just he maintains that and is disciplined in that.
So that's Saturday, next game, everyone. As you'll probably know, it's a game that will be played behind closed doors. However, Celtic TV did say last night they've basically been in touch with Benfica, who I think Jerry McCulloch said are going to stick a few cameras out for them, which seems pretty tin pot for two pretty major European clubs. But that's what's happening. And I didn't realise this team are mid-table last season in the Portuguese top flight. So that'll be a bit of a step up. So
them and Sporting, they're big tests now, especially considering half the team on Saturday will just be playing their first minutes of pre-season. So this is when you start looking forward to the matches more, especially the Sporting game, I think. And then the Newcastle game is going to be a good test, a proper test for the team. And then the Como Cup can add our second bit of silverware to the. What did you make of What did you make of the scenes, the wee pitch invasion, the boisterous youths running onto the pitch, stopping the politician giving the Celtic the trophy outside? You had to do it indoors, and it all looked a bit flustered. I thought it was good part of that.
I just used the word tin pot, so I can't use that again. But and even the trophy itself looked like the kind of one you'd get for a tenner or something and give out at a local fair or something like that. So it wasn't befitting of Callum McGregor, but we'll take it. And it's 3 trophies we can win over the course of pre-season if we win the Adidas
of course.
trophy as well. So exciting stuff. Loads going on the website as well, I take it.
Yeah, Tony's coming back from Ireland today. We've got impressions. I think people should read that Tony article on the Celtic Supporters Association in Ireland if you're interested in that thing, especially if you live over in Ireland. It'll be a good read for you. We've got loads coming up, and as I keep saying, Ryan's coming back later this week, so we'll be fully stocked with staff and be ready to go with all the updates and analysis as usual. Just on the Newcastle game, they've sold a lot of tickets. Newcastle have sold a lot of tickets for that, and that's going to be an interesting day, I think, especially if the Celtic crowd isn't quite at the levels, are quite as motivated to be as boisterous at the levels that Newcastle fans are. It could be a bit of a takeover, that those Newcastle fans. I think there are more than 10,000 coming. Hamish.
So I was thinking this. So if they say they've shifted 10,000 tickets, you'd think we'd get 20,000 together. Bare minimum, like low numbers. And Celtic Park's, get 30,000 in it at that stage, and it'll probably be more than that. So I had visions in my head of it being like totally empty, but I think when you actually factor that Newcastle have got 10,000 coming, I think the stadium might be a bit fuller than we think. People, I know the situation with the club, and it should be on the season tickets. It's just a ridiculous set of affairs. But I think as time goes on, some people, but Celtic back, Kieran Tierney back at Celtic Park, new signings, going up against quite a well-known team that people will know their players and manager. I think people will buy tickets as well. If it's a nice day as well on the day of the game, folk will probably rock up.
Well, I know what would sell tickets. A new winger and a new striker. That would sell tickets immediately, because if there's a glimpse, you get your first chance to see a player what's he all about. I'd like to see him. It does get people through the gates. It traditionally has happened and it still happens. So get a couple of players in the door, Celtic. You maybe sell a few more tickets for that Newcastle game.
Okay, right. We'll leave it there, John. Thank you. Thanks everyone for tuning in and sharing your thoughts, your comments, and those of you who watch afterwards as well. It's much appreciated. More on the website and more from us tomorrow.